On September 7, 2024, the Commander-in-Chief of the IRGC confirmed that Iran had targeted 12 Israeli ships in the Indian Ocean in retaliation for Israeli attacks on 14 Iranian oil-exporting vessels. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz suggested that the Israeli government should shift its attention to Lebanon and Iran, since the country already had enough forces stationed in Gaza to deal with the latter. Meanwhile, the United States has expressed concern about the conflict, stating that a U.S. aircraft carrier cannot be stationed in the region forever to protect Israel, highlighting the need for a cessation of hostilities. But while relations between Iran and Israel seem unsalvageable today, the two countries were not always so hostile. In this video, we delve into their complicated history and their fraught present and question where the region is headed next. Iran and Israel, the arch-nemesis of the modern world, were pretty close up until the 1970s. At that time, trade between the two countries was booming. Israel sold weapons of almost $500 million per year to Iran and was ready to pour down another $1 billion to build surface-to-surface missiles in a joint venture. Both the countries were even building a pipeline between Iran and Israel to transport Iranian oil to Israel and then to Europe. This was at a time when all the other Arab nations were alienating Israel due to an event known as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. In 1948, at the end of the British Mandate in Palestine, David Ben-Gurion, known as the father of modern Israel, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. This declaration led to a conflict with neighboring Arab nations, including Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. The Israeli military subsequently occupied 78% of historic Palestine, resulting in the displacement of at least 750,000 Palestinians, the death of approximately 15,000 people, and the destruction of over 530 villages. But unlike the rest of the Arab world, Reza Shah Pahlavi's regime in Iran ignored the Nakba. The Shah wanted to swap Iranian oil, crucial for an oil-starved Israel placed under oil embargoes by Arab nations, with military equipment and arms. Syed Fraz Hussein Naqvi, who leads the Iran program at the Institute of Regional Studies in Islamabad, Pakistan, believes there were two major reasons for the Shah's cordial attitude towards Israel.
The first reason is that the indigenous Arab states that were the part of the Middle East, and still they were both quite apprehensive towards Israel as well as Iran, because both Iran and Israel are non-Arab states that are present inside the Middle East in an overall Arab region. The second basic reason was the partnership and their alliance with the US. It was basically the US that basically provided the seeding material for the initiation of Iran's nuclear program.
So how did Iran go from being Israel's ally to its most bitter enemy? The answer lies with this man. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, known as the first supreme leader of Iran. In 1979, Khomeini took down Reza Shah Pahlavi, forging a new chapter for one of the oldest civilizations of mankind. Iran's stand against imperialism and colonialism meant that the republic would pivot towards religion. It was now known as the Islamic Republic of Iran. Khomeini had always been deeply critical of the Israeli state, making several speeches against the scourge of Zionism. His speeches were initially designed to rile up the public against Pahlavi, using the previous leader's ties to Israel as a springboard for this furor. This resulted in chants like Merg Bar Amrika and Lanat Alal Yahud at his rallies, meaning death to America and curse on the Jews. This anti-Israel stance continued during the reign of the second supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Dr. Meir Javedanfar, an Iranian Israeli lecturer, author, and commentator at Rehman University in Israel, believes that the Israeli government had tried to avoid this escalation of hostilities.
The Israeli government tried to maintain lines of communication open with the Iranians by supplying them weapons during the Iran-Iraq war. Israel was the only Western country that directly supplied weapons to Iran during that war, with the hope of maintaining relations, covert, and then hopefully developing them to better relations. But 3 years after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, in 1991, Ayatollah Khamenei declared proxy war against the state of Israel.
Javedanfar is referring to the Iran-Contra affair. From 1981 to 1986, the United States secretly supplied weapons to Iran through Israel, even though Iran had been placed under an arms embargo. When this information was first leaked, the White House claimed that the weapons were supplied to placate Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy militia in Lebanon, and get the group to release the 7 American hostages it had been holding for over a year. But journalists later revealed that US President Reagan's administration had been playing a much wider game of chess. By using proceeds from the weapons sales, Reagan had hoped to fund the Contras, the opponents of the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas' Marxist government was seen as a threat that would have bolstered communist insurgencies elsewhere in Latin America. And so, Reagan saw the Contras, who opposed it, as the moral equal of the founding fathers of the United States, and secretly provided them with both financial and military aid. By routing American arms to Iran, Israel stood to solidify ties with the US and weaken Saddam Hussein's Iraqi government, which it saw as a much larger threat than Iran. In response, Iran allegedly provided the intelligence Israel needed to strike and destroy Iraq's incomplete nuclear reactor southeast of Baghdad. At the time, the attack was widely criticized as state-sponsored terrorism. And even today, experts debate whether this move was effective. It propelled Saddam Hussein to redouble his efforts towards pursuing a nuclear weapon. However, the Iranis were not interested in pursuing this seemingly mutually beneficial relationship after the war. Mr. Naqvi believes the Iranians never had any intention of pursuing friendly relations with Israel, even when the Iranian Revolution was first sprouting.
We see the initial slogans of Iranian Revolution. They have labeled Shaitane Buzurg to the US, and which means the greater Satan. But they have also called Israel Shaitane Kuchak, the little Satan, and they have labeled Israel as an illegitimate child of the US. So from the very beginning, we see that Iran has a very harsh and very strict stance towards Israel.
Fast forward to the present day, where Iran maintains and funds a nexus of proxies in the Middle East called the Axis of Resistance, supposedly to curb Western imperialism. This includes Hamas in Gaza, the Islamic Jihad group in the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria, Shia militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. This makes Iran one of the most influential players in the region. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack in southern Israel. In just over 20 minutes, 3,000 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip, killing more than 1,100 people, and dozens were taken captive. This attack was called the biggest attack on Jewish community since the Holocaust. But what does Hamas have against Israel? Hamas demands that Israel cease occupying Palestinian lands and halt the construction of illegal settlements. After the Six-Day War in 1967 between Israel and an Arab coalition, the UN passed Resolution 242, proposing a two-state solution to the conflict. Despite this, Israel has pursued a policy of expansion. According to data released in 2020, over the past 53 years, Israel has established more than 250 illegal settlements on Palestinian lands, with approximately 750,000 Israelis now living there, comprising 11% of the total Jewish population.
We have at least a 75-year conflict with the Palestinians, if not more, okay? It's impossible that in a conflict just one side is responsible, that one side has made mistakes. We've also made mistakes. Nobody's denying. Anybody who tells you that, we are completely innocent and the other side is the Satan, it doesn't matter if they said about us or the Palestinians, that's just wrong. It's morally and intellectually dishonest. We've also made mistakes. We have the most extremist government in Israel's history. They have people who have said racist things about Arab people in this government. We see, for example, in the West Bank, there's attacks against innocent Palestinians and in their homes, and they torch their cars and stuff. This has got to stop. The illegal settlement building has got to stop.
In the aftermath of the October 7th attack, Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu vowed not to stop until Hamas was destroyed. This has translated into a vicious policy of ceaseless bombardment and killing, with nearly 41,000 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces. The vast majority of these casualties are women and children. Israel continues to blame Iran for backing the attack, but Iranian authorities have denied having any previous knowledge or involvement in the attack. Mr. Naqvi also believes Iran was not involved.
The October 7 attack conducted by Hamas or the Palestinian resistance, it is their own act without the support of Iran, because it is not how Iran operates or utilizes its proxy partners. Most of the proxy partners of Iran, they are quite autonomous in their actions. So that is why, in my humble opinion, Hamas conducted the attack on Israel on October 7 by its own whims instead of asking permission from Iran.
Dr. Javedanfar blames Hamas for the destruction in Gaza.
This is a war that Hamas brought upon the people of Gaza. I have to say I'm disappointed by the level of support that there is for Hamas in some places, but after this war, we have to focus on rebuilding a better future, because I think Hamas brought the biggest disaster for the people of Palestine. What did Hamas achieve with this war for the people of Palestine? Is Palestine closer to being a state? I think if you did a survey, Hamas would be very unpopular. But we need to move beyond this and at least learn to live with each other, to have economies that thrive.
But the truth is more complicated. A recent report by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, PSR, published in June 2024, reveals a significant surge in public support for Hamas. An overwhelming two-thirds of Palestinians continue to back the organization, while a staggering 80% believe the October 7th attack successfully thrust the Palestinian issue into the global spotlight. Furthermore, nearly half of Gazans are optimistic about Hamas's chances of emerging victorious and regaining control of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, data from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy shows a notable increase in Hamas's popularity in the West Bank, with approval ratings rising to 41%, a significant jump from 35% in March and a mere 12% in September last year. These findings suggest a substantial shift in public opinion, given how brutal the Israeli assault has been. Meanwhile, Iranian leaders continued to express support for Hamas, promising retaliation when Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was killed on Iranian soil and giving him a public funeral. Over the course of the Gaza war, Israel has also faced resistance from other Iran-backed groups such as Hezbollah and the Yemeni Houthis. Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire across the Israel-Lebanese border for months. The Houthis have been capturing ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Since the war began almost a year ago, Iran and Israel have been engaged in a tit-for-tat exchange, blaming each other for attacks on their soil. These include a huge cyber attack that took out 70% of Iran's fuel stations in December, an attack on the Israeli Mossad center in northern Iraq in January, and an attack on Iran's gas pipeline in February. The rivalry reached a boiling point with the April 1st airstrike on Iran's Syrian consulate, which killed 2 top generals and sparked outrage and vows of retaliation from Iran. Suddenly, this decades-long shadow war bled out into the open, resulting in Iran's first-ever direct strike on Israel on April 13th, involving over 300 drones and missiles. Although most were intercepted, the attack signaled a new level of aggression. All of this continues against the more urgent humanitarian threat posed by the war in Palestine. On July 19, 2024, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, issued a ruling declaring that the actions of the Israeli state amounted to apartheid against Palestinians. The court found that Israel's policies of the expansion of illegal settlements on Palestinian territories constituted systematic oppression of the Palestinian people. The ICJ called for an immediate cessation of these illegal activities and urged the international community to take action to ensure compliance with international law.
This is a setback for Israel. Absolutely, this is not something that we can ignore in the state of Israel. This is quite serious. Look, I would have to tell you two truths. These are both truths. Number one, we are occupying Palestinian lands after 1967. There's no question about that. We didn't receive they attacked us. Yes, we took those lands, but we're occupying it. There's nobody who recognizes those territories as Israeli territory. Number one. And in theory, you should give it back. Okay, that's a truth. It's occupied. You got to give it back. The other truth is that every time we try to give back those occupied territories, the number of attacks against Israeli civilians increased, and more Israeli civilians were killed. So how can I live by international law when it costs the lives of Israelis in such a terrible manner? We have to find a way where Palestinians can have a state and we can have security. Unfortunately, this is an equilibrium that we've never have been able to find.
Mr. Naqvi believes that Iran sees this as a win, since it has been actively seeking international validation of its position through the ICJ.
We have seen for the past few years that Iran has been quite successful in reviving its diplomatic ties with the GCC states, namely the Saudi-Iran rapprochement that we have seen last year. But what Iran is basically trying to do is to put pressure on Israel from every aspect, from military aspect, from political aspect, from institutional aspect, by going to the UN as well as ICJ, International Court of Justice, and all that.
Iran's current nuclear ambitions are another major flashpoint in the escalating tensions with Israel. With uranium enrichment already at 60%, the Iranian program is edging closer to producing weapons-grade material. The stakes are high, with Israel perceiving the program as an existential threat. Mr. Naqvi explained how Iranians are split on the issue of nuclear armament.
Well, we have seen that within Iran there have been some sort of division regarding the pursuance of nuclear program. The conservative or hardliners, for that matter, they are the advocates that Iran should acquire the nuclear technology. But the moderates and reformists are basically of the opinion that Iran should use the nuclear option as a leverage to maximize its economic gains from the West, specifically in the form of sanctions relief. Well, we have seen that. We have seen, and there is another issue which is related to the religious ideology, that the current supreme leader of Iran has basically issued a fatwa against the acquisition of nuclear weapon. But from the recent statements by some of the IRGC commanders, some of the Iranian officials and politicians, we can assume that Iran might rethink its nuclear policy, and Iran might change its nuclear posture, which means that Iran could actively pursue a nuclear weapon in a few weeks or months. So
Iran's nuclear program has long been in Israel's crosshairs. A string of mysterious attacks has targeted key facilities, including a devastating fire at the Natanz nuclear site in July 2020, and a sabotage operation that destroyed thousands of uranium-enriching machines in April 2021. Iranian officials, such as Ali Reza Zaghani, have pointed fingers at Israel, denouncing the incidents as nuclear terrorism. The shadow war has also claimed the lives of top Iranian nuclear scientists, including Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear program, who was assassinated in 2020. Former Pentagon expert Michael P. Mulroy told the New York Times that Fakhrizadeh's killing would significantly set back Iran's nuclear ambitions, dealing a major blow to the program. The escalating tensions and covert operations have raised concerns about the region's stability and the potential for open conflict. Dr. Javedan Farr asserts that Israel's policies are fundamentally rooted in self-defense.
During the 2012, when there was a lot of threats by Israel to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, there was a lot of opposition. I work in academia and in the press by former Israeli officials against plans to attack Iran's nuclear installation. Even a chief of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, the late Meir Dagan, may his soul be blessed. He really was somebody who cared about this country. The late Meir Dagan was opposed to it, very much opposed to it. This was in 2012, but I have to tell you now, in 2024, I hear more than ever before that in order to address the proxy issues, we need to go after their sponsor, and their sponsor is the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think the two countries are closer to war than ever before, unfortunately.
Other regional players also factor into the conflict, with direct or indirect involvement. For instance, Azerbaijan shares a 700-kilometer-long border with Iran and is allied with Israel, allowing the latter to conduct long-range strikes in Iranian territory. Meanwhile, China is emerging as a mediator in the region, first restoring diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, then brokering a deal between two Palestinian rivals, Hamas and Al-Fateh, in July 2024. However, Dr. Javedan Farr believes that China's actions post-October 7th have significantly undermined its potential role as a mediator in the region.
Before this war, we view China as not just a trading partner, but as a superpower with whom it was possible to work diplomatically. But after this war, the Chinese have stood with our enemies, and unfortunately, as a result of that, China has lost any possibility of playing a part as a mediator. And also, our relations with the Americans are far too good. We would not abandon our American friends for the sake of the Chinese. But the Chinese have lost a lot of leverage and standing in Israel because of their policies after the October 7th massacre of Hamas. They've been almost an anti-Israeli country in many ways, and this is going to impact the way they're viewed in the state of Israel.
Mr. Naqvi believes that China prefers to avoid involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict.
China is a major player, but if we are talking about this in the terms of Iran-Israel negotiations, I still believe that China does not want, and China also would not interfere in the Iran-Israel domain, because China is very well aware of the Iranian political psychology and Iranian political attitude towards Israel.
Tensions between these two countries have raised serious concerns about the fragile state of peace in the broader Middle East. The fear of a larger regional conflict is palpable, with many anticipating that further provocations could lead to a more extensive war involving multiple nations. With the Israelis recently launching a new operation on the West Bank, the conflict continues to escalate. It becomes increasingly clear that the Middle East is on the brink of chaos. The intricate web of alliances, historical grievances, and ongoing disputes makes the situation exceedingly complex.